The phone call came at 11:47 p.m. on October 7, 1958. Ella Fitzgerald was in her Houston hotel room, already dressed for the performance that was supposed to start in 13 minutes at the music hall downtown. "Miss Fitzgerald, this is Officer Reynolds with the Houston Police Department. Your manager, Norman Granz, has been arrested. He's being held at the downtown precinct." Ella felt her stomach drop. Arrested? For what? Disturbing the peace, resisting a lawful order. He got into an altercation with Mr. Simmons, the venue manager. Ella knew exactly what that meant. Norman had fought about the entrance again. The colored entrance, the back door they expected her to use. This is the story of what happened that night in Houston, of a white manager who went to jail defending his black artist's dignity, of the decision Ella made that could have destroyed her career, and of the loyalty that would bind them together for the next 40 years. Norman Granz was not a typical music manager. Born in Los Angeles in 1918 to Ukrainian Jewish immigrants, he'd been organizing jazz concerts since the 1940s with one non-negotiable principle: no segregated seating, no discriminatory policies, or he wouldn't book the show. This was radical for the time, especially in the South, and it had cost him money, bookings, and even threats to his safety. Norman had started his jazz at the Philharmonic concert series in 1944, and from the very first show he'd insisted, integrated audiences or no show. Promoters thought he was insane. In 1944, most of America operated under Jim Crow segregation, particularly in the South. Venues had white sections and colored sections. Water fountains were separated, bathrooms were separated. Even the greatest black musicians were expected to perform for segregated audiences and then leave through back doors. Norman refused to accept it. In city after city, he'd arrived to find the venue had ignored his contract terms and set up segregated seating anyway. He'd threatened to cancel. Promoters would scramble. Sometimes they'd relent. Sometimes he'd actually cancel and lose thousands of dollars. In Charleston, South Carolina, in 1955, a venue owner had pulled a gun on Norman when he insisted on integrated seating. Norman hadn't backed down. "Shoot me if you want, but my artists don't perform for segregated audiences." The owner eventually gave in, though he banned Norman's shows from the venue permanently afterward. In Birmingham, Alabama, in 1956, Norman had been told it was literally illegal under state law to have integrated seating at public performances. "Then I guess we're breaking the law," Norman said, and did the show anyway. Police showed up but didn't arrest anyone, probably because the audience included some of Birmingham's wealthiest white citizens who didn't want to be arrested for sitting next to black jazz fans. Music industry people thought Norman was crazy, that his principles would bankrupt him. "You can't change the South," they told him. "You'll lose money. Your artists will lose opportunities. Someone's going to hurt you." Norman's response was always the same: either everyone is treated with dignity or we don't do the show. It's that simple. What made Norman different from other white managers who worked with black artists was that he didn't just talk about equality, he risked real consequences for it. He'd been threatened, cursed at, banned from venues, lost bookings worth tens of thousands of dollars, and he never wavered. He'd started managing Ella Fitzgerald in 1954, and their partnership was built on mutual respect. Norman saw Ella not as a product to exploit, but as an artist to champion. He negotiated better contracts, demanded better treatment, and fought battles Ella couldn't always fight for herself. Ella, for her part, trusted Norman completely. In an industry full of managers who stole from their artists or abandoned them when times got tough, Norman was different. He put his principles and his freedom on the line. The Houston booking had been made months earlier. The music hall was a prestigious venue, and the fee was substantial: $3, $500 for one night, an enormous sum in 1958. Ella's portion would be around $2, $0 after expenses. That was serious money, enough to pay her band for weeks, cover her own living expenses, and send money to family members who depended on her. But there was a problem. Houston was in Texas, the South, and the music hall, despite its prestige, operated under the same segregation policies as everywhere else in the region. When Norman had negotiated the contract, he'd been explicit. Ella Fitzgerald enters through the front door like any other performer. No colored entrance. No back door, no exceptions. The venue manager, a man named Harold Simmons, had agreed over the phone. "Of course, Mr. Granz, whatever you need." But agreeing over the phone from New York was different from actually allowing it to happen in Houston, Texas, in 1958. Ella and Norman arrived at the music hall at 11:15 p.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled 11:30. Performance time. The venue was already full, over 800 people waiting to hear Ella Fitzgerald, one of the biggest names in American music. They approached the front entrance. Norman went first, holding the door for Ella. Harold Simmons appeared immediately, blocking their path. Mr. Granz, Miss Fitzgerald, there's been a misunderstanding. Miss Fitzgerald needs to use the service entrance. No, Norman said calmly. We discussed this. She enters through the front. I understand, but that was before I spoke with the owners. They've made it clear colored performers use the back entrance. It's policy. It's the law here. It's not the law, Norman corrected. It's your policy, and we're not following it. Either Ella enters through this door or she doesn't perform. Mr. Granz, please be reasonable. There are 800 people inside who paid good money. Then you should have been honest when we negotiated the contract. Simmons's face was reddening. You're in Texas now. Things work differently here. You can't just watch me. Norman turned to Ella. Let's go. We're canceling. But Ella hesitated. $2, $0. That was real money. Her band was counting on this gig. She had bills to pay, people depending on her. Norman, she said quietly, maybe we should just... No, Norman said firmly, looking at her. Not this time, not ever. You're Ella Fitzgerald. You don't enter through back doors. Simmons called for security. 2 large men appeared. Gentlemen, escort Mr. Granz and Miss Fitzgerald to the service entrance, please. Norman stood his ground. We're not using the service entrance. Either we use the front door or... We're leaving, Mr. Granz, Simmons said, his voice hard now. I'm asking you nicely. Don't make this difficult. You made it difficult when you lied about the terms. Simmons nodded to the security guards. They moved toward Norman. Sir, you need to comply or leave the premises. Norman didn't move. Ella enters through the front door. What happened next went fast, but every second felt like it lasted forever. The security guards grabbed Norman's arms. Norman pulled away, not violently but firmly. Don't touch me. We're leaving. More security arrived. Now there were 4 large men surrounding Norman. Simmons was shouting, remove them from the premises. Norman raised his voice, not to threaten but to be heard over the chaos. Ella Fitzgerald enters through the front door or she doesn't enter at all. The security guards tried to physically move Norman toward the service entrance. He planted his feet, went limp in their arms, not fighting them but not cooperating either. Classic nonviolent resistance. Ella was trying to intervene. Please, everyone calm down. We can figure this out. But it was past the point of figuring anything out. The venue manager had made his call. Norman had made his stand. Now it was escalating beyond anyone's control. Someone Ella never found out who called the Houston Police Department and reported a disturbance at the music hall, white man attacking security personnel. That's not what was happening. Norman wasn't attacking anyone. But that's what the call said, and that's what brought 4 police officers in less than 6 minutes. When Houston police arrived in 1958 in Texas at a segregation dispute, they didn't ask nuanced questions. They saw a white man surrounded by security, a black woman standing nearby looking distressed, and a venue manager pointing and saying, that man is trespassing and refusing to leave. That was enough, sir. You need to come with us, the lead officer said to Norman. I'm not trespassing. I have a contract to bring Ella Fitzgerald to perform here. The venue is violating the terms by requiring her to use a segregated entrance. Sir, the venue manager wants you removed. You can either leave voluntarily or we'll arrest you for trespassing and disturbing the peace. Then arrest me, Norman said calmly, because I'm not leaving voluntarily and I'm not letting Ella use that back door. The officer looked at his partner, then back at Norman. Sir, I'm asking you one more time, and I'm telling you one more time, either Ella Fitzgerald enters through the front door or this performance doesn't happen. If you want to arrest me for that, go ahead. The lead officer nodded to his partner. Cuff him. They pulled Norman's arms behind his back. He didn't resist, just let them do it, but he kept talking. You're arresting me for insisting a performer use the front entrance. You understand how this looks. Sir, you need to be quiet now. As they clicked the handcuffs shut, Norman looked at Ella. Their eyes met. He saw her face, the fear, the uncertainty, the calculation happening behind her eyes about what this meant. Don't perform. He called to her. Cancel the show, Ella. Don't let them. Sir, I said be quiet. They started walking Norman toward the police car parked at the curb. He called back over his shoulder. Don't use that door. Don't give in. Ella stood frozen, watching them put her manager, her friend, the man who'd spent 4 years fighting for her dignity in ways large and small, into the back of a police car like a criminal. Ella stood frozen as they put Norman in the police car and drove away. Simmons turned to her, smoothing his jacket. Well, that was unfortunate, but the show can still go on. If you'll just use the service entrance. Where did they take him? Ella asked. Downtown precinct, I imagine. Now about the performance. I need to make a phone call, Ella said. That's when she called her hotel, got transferred to the police, and learned Norman was being held on charges that could keep him overnight or longer. Simmons was still talking, his voice urgent. Miss Fitzgerald, I understand you're upset, but we have a contractual obligation. 800 people are waiting. If you don't perform, you won't be paid the $2 fee. You'll be in breach of contract. We could sue for damages. Think about what you're doing. Ella stood there, still able to hear the murmur of 800 people inside waiting. She thought about the $2, 3 months of rent on her mother's house, her band's salaries for 2 weeks, the Nelson Riddle arrangements she hadn't paid for yet. Real money she desperately needed. She thought about the lawsuit threat. Legal fees could eat up months of income, and if she lost, $10 would devastate her finances. She thought about her band backstage, her fans who'd paid tickets, the venues across the South that would hear Ella canceled a show. She's unreliable. Future bookings would be harder to get. She thought about her reputation. 41 years old, 24 years of professional singing, built on never missing a show. Ella always shows up. If she walked away, she'd throw that away. But then she thought about Norman in handcuffs, about his voice, don't use that door. 4 years of him negotiating fair contracts, demanding better treatment, walking away from money when the terms weren't right, and now choosing jail over compromise. If she performed tonight, what message did that send? That you could arrest Norman Granz and still get Ella Fitzgerald to perform. That enough money would make her use whatever entrance you demanded. She thought about other black performers watching. If Ella Fitzgerald, with actual economic power, couldn't stand up to this, what hope did others have? And she thought about tomorrow morning. Would she be proud she'd earned $2, or would she hate herself for using that back door while Norman sat in jail? I'm not performing, Ella said quietly. Excuse me, I don't perform without my manager. Norman Granz represents me. He made a decision on my behalf. I'm standing by it. Miss Fitzgerald, you're making a serious mistake. Where's the nearest telephone? Simmons stared at her. You're really not going to perform? No, I'm going to bail out my manager. You'll lose the fee, you'll lose future bookings. Venues across the South will hear about this. Good, Ella said. Then they'll know I don't work with people who lie about contract terms or expect me to use back doors. She went backstage, told her shocked band the show was canceled, and took a taxi to the downtown police precinct. The desk sergeant looked up as Ella walked in. Can I help you? I'm here to bail out Norman Granz. Are you family? I'm his artist. He works for me. He was arrested defending me. The sergeant checked his paperwork. Bail is set at $500. Ella opened her purse. She had $600 in cash, money she'd brought for the Houston trip, planning to deposit her performance fee and send money home to family. She counted out $500 and pushed it across the desk. I'll need you to sign some forms. As Ella signed, another officer commented, You're Ella Fitzgerald. You're supposed to be performing right now. Not tonight, Ella said. You canceled your show for this guy. This guy went to jail for me. The least I can do is bail him out. They processed the paperwork. 20 minutes later, Norman walked out of the holding cell. His tie was loosened, his jacket wrinkled, but he was unhurt. He saw Ella and stopped. You should be on stage. I should be here, Ella said. Ella, you just lost $2. I just spent $500 getting you out of jail. What's another $2? Norman shook his head, but he was smiling slightly. You didn't have to do this. Yes, I did. You went to jail rather than let me use a back door. The least I can do is show up when you need me. They left the police station together and went back to the hotel. The Houston performance was officially canceled. The venue threatened to sue for breach of contract but never followed through, probably because their own lies about entrance policies would have come out in court. But the consequences were real. Word spread through the southern venue circuit. Ella Fitzgerald and Norman Granz had walked away from a Houston booking over the colored entrance policy. Norman had been arrested. Ella had canceled the show. Some venues respected it, others blacklisted them. Bookings in certain southern cities became harder to get. Ella lost income, her band lost gigs, but something else happened too. Other black performers heard the story, heard that Norman Granz had gone to jail rather than compromise, and that Ella Fitzgerald had given up $2 rather than perform without him. It meant something. It set a standard, and it cemented the bond between Ella and Norman in a way nothing else could have. They worked together for the next 38 years, until Norman retired in the early 1990s. Through recording the songbook albums that made Ella a household name, through her health problems in the 1980s, through career highs and personal lows, they never wavered in mutual loyalty. Norman never asked Ella to compromise her dignity for money. Ella never doubted Norman would fight for her. Years later, in interviews, Ella would mention Norman. Norman went to jail for me once, she'd say. In Houston, he refused to let me use the colored entrance. They arrested him. What did you do? I bailated him out and canceled the show, lost a lot of money. But some things matter more than money, like loyalty, like respect. Like having someone in your corner who'll go to jail rather than let you be treated as less than you are. Norman, when asked, would downplay it. I just did what was right. Ella Fitzgerald entering through a back door. That was never going to happen, not while I was her manager. The Houston incident became legendary in the music industry. It was cited as an example of what real artist manager relationships should look like, of putting principles over profit, of loyalty running both directions. It also became part of the larger civil rights story. Norman Granz using his power as a white man in the music industry to fight segregation. Ella Fitzgerald using her economic power as a major star to support that fight. Both paying real costs, Norman's freedom, Ella's income, to make a stand. Neither of them ever regretted it. In 1996, when Ella died, Norman was devastated. He'd lost not just an artist, but a friend, a partner, someone he'd fought alongside for 40 years. At her memorial service, Norman spoke about their relationship, about the music, the success, the songbook recordings that had become classics, and about Houston. People ask me what I'm most proud of in my career, Norman said. They think I'll say founding Verve Records or producing historic albums. But what I'm most proud of is that night in Houston when I told Ella she didn't have to use the back door and she stood by me even when it cost her everything. That's when I knew we weren't just business partners. We were something more. We were family. October 7th, 1958, Houston, Texas. A front door that should have been open to everyone. A manager who went to jail. An artist who sacrificed $2, $0 in future bookings to bail him out. Not because it made business sense, because it made human sense, because loyalty matters more than money, because dignity can't be compromised for convenience, because sometimes the most important decision you make is who you stand with when standing has a cost. Norman Granz went to jail for Ella Fitzgerald. Ella Fitzgerald gave up a fortune for Norman Granz, and for the next 40 years, they never had to question whether they could trust each other. That's what real partnership looks like.